beautiful souls. Welcome to another video. I am Brittany Shawley, and today I have with me Keith Giles. Keith Giles is the author of a new book called The Quantum Sayings of Jesus, Decoding the Gospel of Thomas. And Keith offers us a look at the Gospels from the perspective of divine oneness. And if true, these sayings may unlock the key to solving humanity's greatest challenges and reveal the startling truth that all of us are connected in this most surprising ways. So needless to say, I've been greatly anticipating this conversation today, Keith, and I'm just so happy to have you on my channel. So welcome to Miracles of Mind.
Brittany, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here and to talk to you about this book and these ideas. This is actually really exciting.
Yay. Awesome. I'm really excited too. I think the first place that I want to start is, do you have just maybe like a summary of like the essence of what we will be talking about today? Maybe just a few sentences of what we might say and talk about?
Yeah. Well, I think that the way I would summarize what we're going to talk about today is the surprising ways that the words of Jesus from this lost Gospel of Thomas overlap with some of the same things that mystics have been saying for thousands of years about our shared divinity and our shared humanity, which also surprisingly overlap a little bit with what quantum scientists are telling us right now about what reality is, what reality really is. And that is that shared divinity and that shared consciousness and oneness.
Beautiful. Perfect. Yes. And this is also why I'm so excited to talk about this stuff. This is like my favorite stuff to talk about. But in regards to this, because I know you even use the language of like hidden gospels, right?
Yeah.
And so who is the teachings of the Gospels of Thomas in your book like for? Like who's the audience of this?
Yeah, you know what? I think you don't have to be like say a Christian. You don't have to be someone who believes in Jesus to appreciate this book. I've found that people that just who are interested in mysticism, interested in oneness or in non-duality and connection and things like that are very interested in the book, as well as people who do have faith. So, or even people that are just curious about, what some of the teachings of Jesus are and what they mean for us today. So I think it has value to people regardless of your faith background. I mean, I've talked to people that are Muslim. I've talked to people, that are Baha'i, people that are, of course, people that are Christians who are very interested in this topic and find a lot of value in what's in the Gospel of Thomas.
Beautiful. That's awesome. I feel that too. Okay, so this is curious to me, but like what was it in your experience in your story that led you to this research? And how were you made ready, like in your mind, in your heart, to take on such a big project?
What a wonderful way to ask that question. Yeah, because I did kind of it had to be I had to be in the right place, to kind of receive it. Because when I initially encountered the Gospel of Thomas like 7 years ago, I read it and I just tossed it aside. I thought, this is nonsense. There's nothing here. I just didn't appreciate it at all. And so it wasn't until, really only maybe like 2 years ago, I had just finished writing this long 7-part book series called the Jesus series, really kind of for people that are Christians and helping them sort of untangle themselves from toxic theology, and things like that. And so, and that was based on my own experiences, right? So I was also going through that myself, as well as writing these books about it. And so I just finished the 7-part series, and then I was kind of in a place where I was saying, okay, I know all the things that I don't believe, but what's next, right? What do I do now? And that's when what I realized was that theology is not about having all the right information about God. In fact, I think it's ridiculous to approach theology this way, because here's the thing. Theology is talking about God, right? And God, we have to start at the place of saying God is a being that transcends human comprehension. Now, if you are a theologian and you're going to start, talking about theology, and you begin by saying God is a being beyond all human comprehension, and the next thing you say is, and now let me tell you all about him. You're already off on the wrong track, right? So what I realized, I was at this place of realizing that it isn't about that. It isn't about information. The gospel that Jesus talks about isn't about having this right theological information. It's about transformation. And transformation is just it's shifted. I went through this paradigm shift away from thinking about the need to be certain about God and about theology and things like that, and more embracing the mystery of God, right? Because again, God is a being beyond all comprehension. And there's something, this was the key for me. There's something in the Gospel of John where Jesus makes this statement, which is way more scandalous than our English translations let on. What it says in the English translation, he says, "This is eternal life, to know God and his Son." But we, in our Western mindset, we read that and I used to always think this. What he means is you have to know God, meaning you have to have all the right theology, you have to write all the right information. But if that is what Jesus meant, he would have, in the Greek, he would have used the word episteme, because that's the word for information and knowledge. But he doesn't. Instead, he uses this other word, this other Greek word for knowledge, and it's the word gnosko. And gnosko is the word in the Greek you would use if you were going to talk about how a husband gnoskoed his wife on their wedding night and she conceived new life within her. So it's a very scandalous statement, actually. If it was translated the way it's written, Jesus is saying eternal life is to have an intimate connection and experience of God and of Christ that conceives this new life within you, this transformation within you. And that's a scandalous and a shocking truth, right? So what that did for me was I shifted. And now when we talk about knowing God, it isn't about having the right theology. Because, by the way, my mind has changed all the time. It's about this, it's not about information, it's about this transformation experience of God. And so it's become something now when I'm engaging the divine, engaging the mystery of God. It's recognizing that I can have an experience of God that I might struggle to put into words and to explain to another person, but I can absolutely experience it, right? And that's in the way that I would say I know God. So this is the space I was in. I wrote a book called Sola Mysterium, Celebrating the Beautiful Uncertainty of Everything. It was all about that idea. And that's when I started getting into quantum science and seeing that quantum science was saying very similar things about oneness and connection. And I wrote a second book called Sola Deus. And so after those two books, then I reapproached Thomas. And actually, I want to say thank you to a guy named William Duffy. He wrote a book called The Hidden Gospel of Thomas. And in that book, he sort of cracked the code for me. Suddenly, Thomas made complete sense, whereas before it made no sense at all. And what Duffy points out is that the missing lens that you need to read Thomas through to make sense of what Jesus is saying in Thomas is this idea of oneness and connection. This idea that, of non-duality, the idea that separation is an illusion. And then as I started reading Thomas, all of a sudden I realized he's exactly right. Now when I read these things in Thomas, they all make total sense when you read it this way. And that got me really excited. And I just kept reading and kept studying and started doing every Friday I was doing a weekly Friday Gospel of Thomas sort of commentary on my blog. And and just then I realized after doing that for a while, like, hey, I could put this together and this could be a book.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Like, I feel like that's so much of how I see Jesus's teachings, is that it's meant to be experienced and then we understand. It's not meant to be understood first. And I think that ties in with what you're saying. It's the mind that we're using to read these things that is going to make it make sense to us or not. And so I love that for you. It's almost been like your own inner purification to allow you to read and take from it what is meant to be read and taken from it, so that you can then give it to us and help us to kind of see through the same lens and like really understand these teachings, because they're radical, but they're so practical and beautiful. And like you said, they're found in quantum science now, they're found in all the mystics. And so it kind of brings things together to be like, wow, everybody's actually saying the same thing. So
that's right.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, can I just tack onto that a little bit? Because
Please.
I that just continuing that thought, because this is something else that I realized about Jesus and the way he taught. Um, because that what we're talking about is consistent with the way Jesus taught things. So if you think about it this way, if what Jesus was trying to communicate was specific and detailed theological information and doctrines that you must get exactly right. I mean, if you don't, your eternal destiny hinges on this, right? So it's really important, everybody, that you understand these very important, specific theological doctrines. And then the way he communicates them is to tell stories that he never explains and to ask a bunch of questions that he never answers for you. That's the worst way possible to communicate specific information that you must get right, right? Or there's this eternal destiny hanging in the balance. But guess what? It's the best way possible if what your goal is to incite wonder and awe and curiosity in people that are listening, right? And that's exactly what Jesus did. And this is also another key thing that Jesus says. He says, unless you change and become like little children, you will never see the kingdom. Now, if you have kids, I have kids,
I do.
you know, when they're little, especially, what are kids are constantly, why, what's this, what's this? You know, they ask questions all the time. They are filled with curiosity and awe and wonder. And I think that's exactly why Jesus teaches the way he teaches. And that's why he tells us that we also must become like this. Our minds need to shift to a place not of answers, but of questions, right? Of being curious. And I think that's what Jesus' teachings do. He encourages us and invites us to engage our own imagination, right? To lean into it, right? To ask those kinds of questions of why and what. And he trusts, this is the beautiful thing, because when Jesus, Jesus asks lots of questions, he doesn't answer very much. And I think it's because he trusts us. He knows that we can be trusted with the Spirit of God, right? That we can wrestle with these things and that God will lead us to all truth, right? And the truth will set us free. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. And this is consistent with the way Jesus behaves and the way he teaches.
Mic drop, Keith. Ah, yes. I love that so much. And I'm like seeing the imagery of like the little children, which I have an 8-year-old, right? Like, well, why this? Why that? Why
Yeah.
everything? But what I've noticed is that they ask someone that they trust, right, for
Yes.
the answers. And I feel like Jesus is wanting us to do the same thing, that like we want to be in that place of curiosity so that we can consult our elder brother Jesus, and like be like, hey, like,
Yes.
help me to understand this like experientially in my own mind and heart without you telling me. I don't want you to tell me the answers, but thank you for helping me to find the answers
Yes.
myself. And I definitely feel that's what he's all about too. So
Yes.
this is
No, totally agree.
so good. Okay. So next. So we've already said some, but we're just going to see what else. But what are some of the key teachings in the
Mm,
Gospel of Thomas? And if
mhm.
you were to put some conclusions together today, what is the significance of this gospel for us today?
Yeah. Well, there are several teaching that I really love in the Gospel of Thomas as I've gone through it. I should say, there's 114 sayings in Thomas. Half of them are also found in the other Gospels in the New Testament. Although in Thomas, they're just the sayings. So when you take them out of these sort of contexts of, oh, he was going here and he was talking to this person and stuff, it's just the saying all alone by itself. It allows you to really, ask more of these questions and to see a little bit deeper into what the meaning of these sayings are. But of course, the other half of them are brand new. They only appear in Thomas. And so again, each of these sayings is trying to teach us something, trying to teach the disciples, and then of course us as well as we're reading these sayings, to recognize that the world as we perceive it, which our senses are telling us that we're divided, that we're separate. That the spiritual reality is that we're not divided, that we are connected to God and to one another. And so one of those sayings that I really love is saying 22. And this is where he talks about, I think this is a pretty profound way, and one of the most obvious ways that he's talking about this illusion of separation. So in saying 22, it says, Jesus saw some infants who were being suckled, and he said to his disciples, these infants being suckled are like those who enter the kingdom. And they said to him, shall we then become infants to enter the kingdom? Now that's similar to a saying from the regular, the New Testament Gospels, but then it shifts. Jesus says to them, when you make the two one, and when you make the inside as the outside, and the outside is the inside, and the upper is the lower, and when you make the male and the female into a single one, so that the male is not male and the female is not female, and when you make eyes in place of an eye, and a hand in place of a hand, and a foot in place of a foot, an image in place of an image, then shall you enter the kingdom. And so, it's really just another way of saying similar things that Jesus says in other places in the Gospels, and even things that the Apostle Paul says. Like, for example, in one of Paul's first letters in Galatians, he says, in Christ, there is no male or female, slave or free, Jew or Gentile. Why? Because we are all one in Christ. So in other words, those divisions that we see and all these different, hierarchies and classifications, they lose their meaning in Christ. And there's also this beautiful saying in the Gospel of John that I think mirrors this saying 22, where Jesus says, he says to his disciples, in that day you will realize this, meaning you don't get it now, but one day you're going to get it. In that day you're going to realize this. Here it is. You're going to realize I am in the Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. And I used to always read that as Jesus talking about himself. It's just about him, right? This is something special that's only about Jesus. But all through Thomas, we see Jesus telling the disciples that this is true of us. It's helping us realize who we are. That because we're one with the divine, and all of us are one with the divine, in the same way that the Father is one, or Jesus is one with the Father, we also now share this oneness together. And so that's what he's saying in saying 22 is your eyes have to be opened. You have to reach a place where you realize inside and outside are illusions. That's no inside and outside. There's just one thing. There's no male or female. There aren't these divisions and separations. And that goes to the quantum level too. I don't talk a whole lot in this book about the quantum stuff. I really talk about it in my other books. But the ideas are still there. Like on the quantum level, what scientists are saying is that, again, our senses kind of lie to us. Our eyes tell us, our ears tell us, our senses tell us that you're over there and I'm over here. And this is my microphone and this is my coffee cup. And these are all separate things and they're not the same. That's how we perceive reality. And this is what Jesus says in Thomas, like, this is the way you see the world, but it's an illusion. It's not real. Quantum physics says that at the quantum level, what they realize is there are no separate things. There's only one thing in the whole universe. In fact, the universe is this one thing. It's the quantum field. There's just a quantum field. And everything is an expression of that quantum field. So you might see it as a separate thing or person, and it appears that way, but at its quantum level, at its most basic level, it's the same thing. So there is no division. There is no separation. Everything is the quantum field, and the quantum field is everything. And having this realization that you could almost it's interchangeable, right? You can take things in scripture, you can take things in Thomas, and when they're talking about Christ, you can change it to the quantum field, or you could change it to consciousness, or you could change it to, the source or whatever. And it's the same, they're all saying the same things. And that's what's really exciting to me. So that's one of my favorite sayings in Thomas is saying 22, because he just flat out says, inside and outside, male and female, up and down, left and right. These are things you perceive as real, but they're really not. And we have to get beyond that to see the core truth deep within that, which is, it all comes down to unity and connection.
I'm so glad you quoted that because that's one of the ones that I wanted us to kind of expand upon because it spoke to me so deeply too. And like what I hear and what you're saying, and the second part of what you read from the sayings of the gospel is I'm hearing, actually I had an interview last week about a brother who brought our awareness to like, we need to see with the eyes behind the eyes, the ears behind the ears, and the heart behind the heart. And I feel like that's what you shared with us in your demonstration, that you had to look at the gospel through new eyes in order to understand it. And I believe that's also what Jesus says in the Bible when he says, like, may the Christ mind of Jesus also be in you. Right. It's that idea of like, we are this one mind that is in you already, but may you like accept it for yourself and see through it yourself. Right. So it's this idea of like truth is true. It's all the quantum field. It's all God. But
Yeah,
if we won't really know that, understand that, unless we give ourselves permission to hear with the ears, behind the ears, the eyes behind the eyes, and the heart behind the heart. And that's a training. That's just a process of training. Like you said, you might not see it or understand it now, but Jesus knows that we will. And so we just have
that's
to have
right.
that faith in ourselves and each other's that we will.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. That's exactly right. And then, here's the thing I want people to understand as well. Because again, I came up through this evangelical Christian, very conservative tradition um, before I got to where I am now. And if someone's kind of still coming from that place, I think they could hear what we're saying and think like, oh, but these are new ideas. These are new thoughts that you're importing into the text.
Mm.
And it's not at all, actually. If you study early church history, and I've done a whole lot of studying of early church history and church fathers, there were Christians in the first century who thought exactly like this, right? And this is the reason why, and by the way, the Gospel of Thomas is not a new text. There are scholars today, many scholars today, that believe that the Gospel of Thomas was written somewhere between the writing of the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of John, because there's evidence that the author of the Gospel of John is responding to things in Thomas, which means it had to exist for him to respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a new text. Like a lot of people say, like, they want to compare it to like Gnostic texts or the Gospel of Judas and some others that are, came much, much later, like second and third century. Thomas is literally just a collection of the sayings of Jesus. It was around the same time that the Gospels themselves in the New Testament were being written. And there were communities of Christians. Valentinian Christians are one big example of this, who were not Gnostics, but were Christians who understood this very simple idea that what Jesus was talking about was non-duality. He was talking about, again, that Christ, but we see the Christ reflected in the person of Jesus, but that's not the end of it, right? As Paul says many times, we are the body of Christ, right? So maybe we can see it in Jesus in the beginning, but the concept of Christ expands outward, right? And Paul says many, many times that what is true of Christ is true of us. So he says, like, Christ was crucified, therefore you were crucified. Christ is raised from the dead, therefore you've been resurrected. Christ is sitting at the right hand of the Father, and so now you are sitting at the right hand of the Father. Not you will be, you are now.
Mm.
And so what's true of Christ is true of you now.
Mm.
And so there is, again, no difference, right? There is this connection and this oneness between Christ and us. We are, again, I shouldn't even say Christ and us, because the Christ, we are Christ. Christ is in us and in all things, right? Like the quantum field. So yeah, it's one of my favorite sayings in Thomas. But again, that kind of thing is repeated all throughout the Gospel of Thomas.
That's so beautiful. And that's one thing that I love that you pointed to as well, that like the Gospel of Thomas is seen as the hidden gospel, but then you pointed out like a list of quotes that are in the Bible that
Yes,
like half the Gospel of Thomas is in the Bible. So
yes.
that's a lot. So it wasn't necessary, it wasn't really hidden. You were saying
No,
like hidden in
no.
plain sight.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's I mean people call it hidden in the sense that, well, it literally was buried in the sand for like over 1,000 years before we found it in 1945. So in that sense, yes, it was literally hidden from us until it was translated, like I think in 1950s. We didn't have an English book you could buy at a bookstore until 1970s.
Mm.
So it's relatively new. But even within Thomas, there's this idea of things being hidden. And like you said, but it doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to bury it so you can't find it. It's like, no, it's right in front of you. You just don't see it. But Jesus is trying so desperately in Thomas to help us see it over and over and over again. He's trying to say, see it. Like he uses this metaphor all the time of waking up, open your eyes, stand up, right? Which is what you do when you wake up. When you're sleeping, you're laying down. When you wake up, you stand up. So he's using these ideas all the time. Wake up, stand up, look and see and know. Because once you see it, once you realize it, this is the other thing that's kind of shocking. Jesus is like, now you don't need me. You recognize your connection with the divine, and now you have your own connection with God, right? And so you only really need it to have your eyes opened in that initial encounter. But once it's opened, okay, now you can see. You don't need anyone to hold your hand and help you figure it out.
Yes. I love that. I feel like that's what all true teachers should do ultimately, is give so much of their wisdom and knowledge to their students that they don't need them
Yes.
anymore. Like that's the point. And that's why he's a
Yes.
master, because he knows
Yes,
what's up
exactly.
before all of us know what's up. But what I heard in that language too, which I never saw before, but it dropped in this idea of like, it's not necessarily, yeah, it was underground. So for that sense, it was hidden, but Jesus uses metaphors of hidden all the time. And what makes me think of is when he talks about our hidden treasure is hidden
Yes.
inside of us, right? Like that the
Mhm.
treasure is the kingdom and it's in you. So even though
Yes.
it's quote technically hidden, it's the closest thing to you. It's not at all. It's the most obvious thing when you look for it.
That's
So,
right. That's
yeah,
exactly right. Yeah. It couldn't be closer, right? It's as close as your own heartbeat and your own breath.
beautiful. Oh, I'm loving this. Okay, where do I want to pivot to? So I'm not sure if you know this because I don't know your background in this regard, but a lot of those who are listening to this are Course in Miracles students, and I'm a
Mhm.
Course in Miracles teacher. And so my question kind of ties into that just for some of our listeners today. But my question is like, how does the Course in Miracles, if you know it all, and I'm happy to share some ideas, how does it link with the Gospel of Thomas? Like what might be shared in the same in that?
Yeah. I'll be honest, I really don't know. I'm aware of the Course in Miracles, and I have Marianne Williamson's book, but beyond that, I don't know a whole lot about that. But if yeah, I'm sure you can find some connection points there.
Yeah, because I think it's very similar to what you're already saying and what we're already saying. Like I think one of the main ones is that Jesus in A Course in Miracles really highlights this like introspective approach to our relationship. And he says that all of our answers are found within, they're not found outside. So
That's
a
right.
big part of it is helping us to remove those blocks in our perspective filter so that we can look on the world through the eyes of Christ, right? And when we look on the world through the eyes of Christ, that we will come to know ourselves as
Yes.
Christ.
Yeah.
So I
I
believe
agree
like
with that.
it's
Yeah.
fundamentally kind of, it says the same thing in my experience.
Yeah. Oh no, I totally agree with that. I think that's exactly right. I think that's an important thing, Brittany, to recognize that. I'll just say again, from my background, again, growing up in a conservative evangelical Christian background, um, so much of that conditions us to mistrust ourselves,
Mm,
to doubt yourself, to believe that all my thoughts are evil all the time and there's nothing good in me. And, those kind of ideas, even the hymns we sing, right? It saved a wretch like me. I'm a wretch. I'm a worm. I call it worm theology. And what's so damaging about it, other than psychologically and emotionally, being damaging, it's not healthy. It's not a good thing. Um, it can be very difficult for someone who's been conditioned in that to trust themselves, to trust that they are capable and
mm,
that they even should um, trust that the truth is within them or that Christ is within them. You're taught to like, oh, no, don't listen to that. And here's what I find so crazy. What I finally realized, this thing that clicked for me, like why this teaching is wrong. Because it was essentially saying to you, as the Christian in the pew sitting under the pulpit, um, under the teaching of someone in the pulpit, is don't trust that voice you hear from the spirit within yourself. No, 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 that's dangerous. Just trust Pastor Bob. Let him tell you what God wants. Like, to me, that's a cult.
it
That's
is.
like
I've been
scary. Like,
talking out a
no,
lot about
why
that
would I
lately.
trust him?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so learning to trust that you have the ability. And by the way, this is also something the Bible says as well. There's a verse in First John that says, "You have the truth within you, and you don't need anyone to teach you." Like I never heard a sermon on that, but it says that we, in fact, the entire idea of a new covenant is exactly this idea. It's again, it's in Jeremiah in the Old Testament, God says he's going to make a new covenant. Jesus declares the new covenant, and then it's repeated in Hebrews that the new covenant has been, we're under it now. And here is the whole new covenant. It's all about this. God says, no one will say to their neighbor, know the Lord. Why? Because you can all know me. The
Mm,
whole idea in Acts chapter 2, when it says the Spirit of God was poured out on all flesh, men and women, young and old, right? Again, there's those distinctions, rich and poor, right? All those things. Everyone. And so now there's no separation. There's no division. The symbolism of the veil in the temple being torn in two was saying, we don't need this anymore.
mm,
You don't need a priest. You don't
mm,
need a temple. You don't need, because in fact, again, Paul emphasizes you are the temple. He says this. He says to the church, you are the temple. What was the temple in that old mindset? It's where the presence of God was. So where's the presence of God now? Well, you're the temple. It's in you, right? You don't need a priest. You don't have to go to a priest anymore. Why? Paul says you are all priests. There's the priesthood of all believers. Guess what? You're the priest now. You're the one who has direct access to God. Not Pastor, but you don't need Pastor Bob. Pastor Bob can do his own thing. But you have a direct connection to God. And not only that, in that temple system, there was a sacrifice. The sacrifice was the thing you had to bring to the priest in the temple, a holy person in a holy place at a holy day on a holy time, to bring the sacrifice. And then if that was acceptable to God, then you might have this sort of restored connection with God. But again, what Paul says is that, no, you are the daily living sacrifice. You don't have to die. Nothing's dying, and it's you. You're the priest, you're the temple, you're the sacrifice. You are the fulfillment of all of those things. You are living now in this new covenant reality. There is no separation between you and God, and you can absolutely trust that you can know God for yourself. And I have to emphasize that because I heard my whole life the complete opposite. And it's not only wrong, it's anti-Christian, it's anti-gospel. It's going against the new covenant. It's going against what Jesus says. It's going against what Paul says. And it's created a dependency religion. I think the church has become, someone once told me, the church is a school that no one ever graduates from. Ooh. Because they want to always make you dependent on them. And I think this teaching, what we're saying here, what Jesus is saying in the Gospel of Thomas, and other mystics have said, and the Course in Miracles says, is that no, you are fully capable on your own of having this incredible experience with God, and that connection is right here, as close as you can get.
Thank you so much for highlighting that. Like that is everything, because I think that's the difference between an outside-in approach, which he uses the language in the Course of the seek and do not find, versus when you turn yourself within and like you purify your doubts and fears through the Spirit, like you will come to know that oneness and that space beyond all things. And you're so right too in highlighting the fact that a lot of the other teachings around Jesus's messages are contributing to the lack of trust in ourselves. And that to me is something that I'm trying to bring forward and highlight the most in my work as well, that like the first characteristic, he says, of accepting this stuff is trust. Like trust is the foundation. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. So I'm such a firm believer of us learning how to trust that inner guidance system. And like you're saying, everything is in you. You are everything that you need. And he even says that your church is in you and it's in your relationships. Like that's enough, that you have everything, right? So to me, this is like cause for like celebration, like this is like, I want to scream it from the rooftops and let everyone know. And Jesus is like, okay, calm down. You'll speak to those who are meant to hear. Thank you for your willingness. But like I feel like the Gospel of Thomas and then your work and like your interpretations on his work are so accurate to how I feel Jesus is teaching me to see his word, that it's like, there's more confirmation that this is of him. And so this is just so masterful.
See, it's actually like good news, isn't it?
It's good news. Such good news.
Yes. I love it.
Me too. Makes me so excited. Okay. So this is an interesting topic, but like I felt really inspired to ask this to you. And I feel like I was inspired to ask this of you because when I read through your book, and like I said, some of your conclusions and your thoughts of what Jesus is teaching, it's very poetic and it's very beautiful. You're a really good writer. But one of the thoughts, we've already talked about this so much, but apparently it's our theme, but you had written, like, I look forward to the day when we all finally see that there's really no such thing as us versus them. There is only us. And so my thought with that was, okay, I wonder if you've written any like poetry inspired by the Gospel of Thomas. And if you have, like, can you talk to us a little bit about that, or like share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah. I think that's the bottom line for Thomas. I think this is the reason why I love at the beginning the way you asked me this question. I do feel that this book is it's not just that I was ready for it. I feel like we're ready for it, when I think people feel the division. I think I've never seen us more divided. I'm an old man, but I mean, I'm at 50, I'm like 55, but in my lifetime, I've never felt more division everywhere we turn, right? Religious division, political division, sexuality, war, nationality, genocide. Like there's at every level, everywhere we turn, especially on the internet, we're constantly being given these images of us and them, right? Why we're right and they're wrong, we're good and they're bad. And it creates so much division, and it's so toxic, and it's so um, it's violent to our souls. And as I'm reading through Thomas and I'm reading these words of Jesus, I feel like I really almost in some ways feel like maybe it was part of a divine plan that Thomas was hidden and we
Mm,
didn't get it until the 1970s, because it's like this needs to be a fresh message for us. We need to get it. Right? These are words of Jesus from 2,000 years ago, buried in the sand and not uncovered until the 1945 and then put in English in 1970s. So that we can still be now, it's a fresh thing. We're still thinking about it and talking about it, because it's this beautiful message that if we can get this, if humanity can get this idea that we are divine, we are one, um, it's the way we can fulfill what Jesus says about loving your neighbor as yourself. Because when I look at my neighbor, if I can get this, when I look at my neighbor, I don't see another person. I see myself. I see the divine. This is how I can love my enemy, because I don't see an enemy. I see myself. I see someone made in the image of God, which is love. Um, and I love them, right? It's the way I can share what I have with the widow and the orphan and the poor. Because again, when I see them, I don't see an other. I see myself and I see Christ. That's why Jesus says in Matthew 25, whatever you've done to the least of these, you did it to me. Exactly. He
mhm,
wants us to get this.
mhm,
And again, I think I don't want to be too hokey,
mm.
or, it sounds hokey or whatever, but I think it's really true that if we as humanity could get this idea and see our shared divinity and our shared humanity, we'd never go to war. It'd be the end of racism and prejudice. It'd be the end of genocide. It'd be the end of poverty. Because again, we would be overwhelmed with the realization of our shared divinity and our shared humanity. And that would open up this empathy that I think right now we need so desperately. And so, yeah, that's why I'm so excited to share this book with people, because I feel like this message, and again, this message it's in Thomas, but it's also in Buddha and Rumi and Black Elk and Alan Watts and Brene Brown. And, there's all kinds of places to turn
Yeah.
and hear this voice, which I believe is the voice of the divine, telling us over and over and over. And now in recent times, quantum science is confirming, hey, everybody, this is true. There's just one thing. It's the quantum field. There is no you and me, us and them. It's just this one thing. And we're all part of it. We're all connected. And it's such a powerful, beautiful message. And like I said, I think we need it now more than ever.
Yes. Yes, amen. And I think you're onto something when you say like we're ready for it now, right? We're ready
Mhm.
for the gospel now, and we're ready to understand the gospel now and live it. And there's such a parallel with that, even with the A Course in Miracles. Like it was brought out at one time, highly edited, and then hidden material was found, which was the original manuscripts, which I'm now in part bringing to the world, right? Because I'm like, this
Yeah.
is invaluable stuff. Like this has to be included. Oh my God. So I feel the same thing that, you know, that version of the book came at the time for the people who are ready for it there. This version of the book is coming now for the people who are ready for it now. And this is part
Yes.
of the great awakening that he speaks of,
Yes.
right? And
Yeah.
so I feel like this
Yeah.
is what we're being called to do. And as you were talking, I saw something. I might be wrong, okay? But what I saw is I was like, what what made like Thomas's gospel different and just the sayings? And I had the thought of like, isn't Thomas the one who's known as like doubting Thomas? That he's the one who
Hmm.
doubted a lot of what Jesus said. And then I thought, okay, well, if I'm doubting what my master is saying, I would ask him questions so
Yeah.
that I can understand, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of us grappling with his message, like wrestling with what he's teaching us, so that we don't just like, oh, my master said it, it must be true. It's more like,
Exactly.
no, 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 no. What does this mean for me? And I
Yeah.
feel like in essence that is what Thomas stood for, that I'm not just going to accept this as blind truth because you told me to. I
Right.
want this to be proven to me. And so
Yes.
he was given like experiential practical guidance of like
Yes.
how it is that he can experience it in himself because he was ready for it. He was asking the right questions, but maybe humanity wasn't ready for it at that time. And so
Yeah.
it's the divine timing of things that's in his hands anyway. So I don't know. I don't know if I'm on point with that or that means anything, but that's what came to me as you were talking.
No, I totally agree. I think that you see this refrain all through Jesus and even in the Old Testament, New Testament, again, and just that taste and see, that invitation, taste
Mhm.
and see, right? Test for
Right.
yourself and see. It is the invitation to say, don't just take my word for it, right? And again, Jesus definitely does this in Thomas. There's one of the sayings where Thomas calls him master, and Jesus says, I'm not your master. It's like, look for yourself, find these answers for yourself. And know this is true for yourself, And so again, because it is true, there's no fear. Again, so if I'm trying to trick somebody and I'm trying to get them to believe me, I don't want them. Don't read that. Don't look at that. Don't listen to
Yes.
these other people, right? Just listen to
Don't
me.
question.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because I'm afraid you're going to find out something else that would contradict me. But
Right.
if I'm telling you the absolute pure truth, I'm not afraid.
Right.
Go and look, go and explore, go and see if what I'm saying is true.
Yes.
Right? It will resonate in yourself, in your own spirit, but it'll also be confirmed by other things that you look at and see and too, and you go, oh yeah, I see that. That confirms what was said. And what I know in myself is true.
Exactly. And that's back to like having the filter and the want to find confirmation for what is true instead
Yes.
of the mind that's going to try and seek things to disprove it. Like it's always a
Yeah.
choice. And I love that you just said, I want to find that quote because I'm not really familiar with it, but where Thomas was saying, master, and he said, no, I'm not the master. I
Yeah.
have to go look at that again. But I think that that's genius because I think of
Yeah.
Jesus's quote, you cannot serve two masters. And that
Mm.
clears things up that he's really talking about an inward thing that either you're serving the master of Christ within or you're serving your own ego, right? Like the human
Yeah.
ways. And like that's a choice between that. And so it's again not an external thing like having an external master,
Yes.
but realizing that that external master that's showing up as the Christ is reflecting the Christ in you. So you want to serve this in you every moment of the day. And I believe that that's,
Yes.
yeah, that ties into all this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's saying 13 where he
There it
says
is.
that.
Okay.
Thomas says, Master, I am wholly incapable of saying whom you are like. And Jesus says, I am not your master.
There it is.
Because you have drunk, you have become intoxicated from the bubbling spring which I have measured out. Yeah, it's an invitation to see that Christ is within you, right? And to trust that and listen to that. Like the Christ you're looking for, the Christ you're seeking is not outside of you. It's not external. It's in here. And you have to realize that and recognize that and then learn to trust that voice, right?
I think that might be probably like a sticky point, or at least I've seen that be a sticky point for people who have left a church or are like leaning out of the church, is that they still love Jesus. They just don't agree with all
Yes.
the theology around Jesus. And I've
Yes.
found that they have this like trepidation of leaving the church because they feel like they're doing something against Jesus. And if they're not worshiping him, they feel like
Yeah.
they're doing him a disservice or something. I don't know
Yeah.
what my question is around that, but can we expand on that a little bit? Like, what are your
Yes.
thoughts around that? And can we ease some fears in the leaning out of religion and into
Yeah.
Jesus?
I hope this eases some fears. It might scare people even more, but I'm going to tell you something about that.
Please.
Again, I'm going to base this on the New Testament.
Perfect.
Um, so again, I kind of feel like, first of all, if someone's feeling that way, like, oh, I have to worship Jesus, like notice that every time people tried to worship Jesus or to make him king or to elevate him, he ran away from those people. He wanted nothing to do with that, right? He was avoiding, no, 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 no. He didn't want that. Now, there's this thing in Philippians chapter 2 where Paul quotes this thing. And in fact, many scholars think it's not Paul's quoting it, but he didn't come up with it. It was actually an ancient hymn that because again, Paul came late to the game of Christianity. Christianity was going long before he showed up, people following Jesus and stuff, right? He was persecuting the church. Then he was converted and all that, right? He realized who Christ was. Okay, so Paul's quoting this hymn in Philippians chapter 2. And he says, you should have the same, your mind should be the same as that of Christ. And then he tells you this thing about Christ, that even though Christ was equal with God, he didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself,
Mm.
humbled himself, became found in the form of a man, even a servant, not just a man, but even lower than that. He became a slave and a servant to all. Um, Here's what's really fascinating about that. First of all, that Paul says, your mind should be the same as Christ's mind. And the first thing he says is as you're doing that is to recognize, that 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 he was one with God, that even though he was one with God, he humbled himself. So
Mm,
you should begin that way too. You're one with God. Okay. And yes, you should have humility in that,
right.
but you still begin with that idea. You should have the same mind of Christ, recognizing that you're one with God. Now, all the other language in that hymn, which predates Paul, he's just quoting it. All those images, humbling yourself, serving, all those things. And in the Greek, especially, it's very much highlighted if you read it in the Greek. Those are the same words that you would use to describe worship. You
Mm,
humble yourself, you serve, you humble yourself, you serve your God, you elevate God, right? You come underneath and you lift up God. Jesus, in this hymn in Philippians 2 that Paul quotes, Jesus does all of these things to us.
mm,
So actually, Jesus worships us. And then Paul's, but that's in the context of Paul saying, and you should be like that. Even though you recognize that you are one with God, you then should also then sort of worship, love your neighbors yourself, love your enemies, right? Have the same outpouring of love and for not for God, but for others, the way
yes.
Jesus did.
Yes.
So again, I think Jesus really never asked us to worship him. And in fact, I think worshiping Jesus is a detour. It's
Hmm.
a shortcut. It's like, because what Jesus asked us to do was to listen to him and follow him, right? Why do you call me Lord, Lord? You don't do the things I say. He doesn't want you to worship him, sing songs to him on Sunday mornings and wave your hands around. He never asked you to do that. Um, his example was, I'm gonna humble myself. I'm gonna worship you, but this is an example for you to do the same to one another, right? Everything hinges on this: love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yes.
And he embodies this. So again, I don't think worship is what we're called to do. I think we're called to pay attention to his example, to follow him.
Hmm.
That's what he asked. All of his
Yep.
disciples, he said, follow me,
Yep.
right? That's what it's
Not
about.
worship me.
Not worship me, follow me. That's right.
Oh my goodness. This is reminding me of like a story that the scribe of A Course in Miracles said. And she had this experience of like Jesus coming to her one of the first times and her just being blown away by his beauty and his magnitude and his presence and his love, that she fell to her knees in almost like awe of him, like in worship of him. And in her mind's eye and her heart and her experience, what she saw is that Jesus came and kneeled beside her. And he said to her that if you're going to kneel, oh, you make me cry. If you're going to kneel at my altar, I'm going to kneel at yours.
Yes. 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 This is the upside down way. We are so, our ideas of God, like we even think about God. There's a passage, I think it's in the book of Acts, that talks about, I think it might be in Pilate or was one of the Roman governors. And there's a passage about how he comes out to the crowd and he's wearing this armor and it's gleaming and he looks regal and powerful, and he comes in and everyone's worshiping him and everything, and they're saying that he looks like God, right? And it's like, no, you don't get it. You don't see it, right? When Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Okay, so let's look at Jesus if we want to see what God is like. What do we see? Someone who's big and proud and says, bow down and worship me? Absolutely not. We see someone on his knees, washing our feet, touching the leper, embracing the woman with the issue of blood, who no one else would touch, right? Going to women when in a culture where women were not honored at all, and making a point to go to a Samaritan woman and a Samaritan woman who's also like an adulteress, right? How low can you go? This is God. This is who God is. Humbling, lowering. And again, that goes back to the Philippians 2 passage. Paul is saying, you want to know what God is like? It's like this. It's coming down. It's going under. It's not being over. That's what we're missing. That's what we need to get. And so it isn't about, this relationship of God's up here and we're down there. No, Christ is within you. And this Christ within you is calling you to get on your knees and wash feet for you to embrace the person that no one else will be with, right? This is what it's all about. It comes down to the expression of love. And it goes back to the idea in Genesis 1. Every human being is made in the image of God. And who is God? Love. So you can't escape it, right? It's in the DNA of God, and it's in our DNA as well. It is all about love.
It's all about love, love without opposite.
Yes.
That's one thing that I feel is like radical, because we hear God is love in the Bible all the time. It's spoken all the time, but then there's also the wrath of God, right?
Yes.
He's going to punish you. It's a punishing God. So for me, I'm
Right.
like, my God's not schizophrenic. I don't know. It doesn't change
Yeah.
the man about me, you know?
Yes.
It's like when my God is a loving God, he's a loving God. And that's why I also love the prodigal son story, because we can go and we can navigate
Yes.
all these mistakes, but he will always welcome us home. And so
That's right.
I love, I was thinking too, like, well, what are some ways that we can live in the teachings of Thomas? Like, how can we really follow in Jesus's footsteps? And you've said a few things. I would like to see if you can share a few more, but even the idea of like, we are to wash people's feet. We are to care
Yeah.
and serve for others. We are to listen to the spirit within to move us to act and to love and to bless and to serve. And so I feel like that's what Jesus did. And so that's what we want to do too. And so, yeah, maybe on that, do you have any other maybe practical things that people can take away to get themselves more closely, like acquainted with the Gospel
Mm.
of Thomas, or just Jesus's teachings in general?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think when I wrote my book in such a way, I feel like it's probably one of the easiest ways to digest it is almost like a devotional, because
Yeah.
there's 114 sayings. And so you could just like get up in the morning, get your coffee, read one of the sayings, read the reflection, and
Mhm.
then think about it during the day. And I feel like there's sort of a relentlessness to the Gospel of Thomas, because again, it's just 114 sayings. Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said. Um, it's not trying to tell you any stories or teach you any theology, and it's all of these different ways that Jesus is trying to get us to see this same simple truth.
Right.
Part of it is um, this is what I find to be the challenge, and it's just the challenge is within ourselves, that even if you see it, even if you get it, right? And I don't really care how you get it. If you get it through
Great.
Rumi or quantum physics or Buddha or Thomas, it doesn't matter. Jesus, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The important thing is you need to get this. But even when you get it, even when you go, oh my gosh, I have this shared divinity and this shared humanity, and everything is connected. Wow, that's great. Again, our senses lie to us. The way we perceive the world, it's like within 5 minutes you can click back and you're back to thinking that person is over there and I'm over here, and us and them. It's easy to fall back into that. So I feel like, again, the sort of, like I said, relentlessness of Thomas is intentional. It's necessary. Like, I feel like myself, I need constant reminders of this. And I think everybody needs to find their own way of sort of like maybe a spiritual discipline, in a way
Yeah.
of finding ways to stay in that space of being awakened and of seeing it, having your eyes open, and really, really living out of that reality, not just knowing it, but living out of it, right? And so that has changed for me over time. I think a few years ago, it was very important for me to spend a lot of time in meditation and silence.
Mhm.
And my wife and I would do that a lot, and 2 or 3 times a week. And it was beautiful and it was very helpful. It kind of recentered me. It's, in the silence, so that, kind of just recognize, oh yeah, this is true. I mean, it's like, for me, when I would spend time in meditation and silence, within a few breaths, it was just like, oh, there he is.
There he
There's
is.
Christ, there's God.
Mhm.
And he's always been there. And I'm aware of it. And then all my troubles and doubts and fears, they just like, they're gone, they flow away. And I'm like, wow, this is right. This is good, right? And you want to just stay in that space as long as you can. It's just so good. And so that was really important to me, like probably like the last 2 or 3 years. And I was doing that a lot. But now I'm at a place where I don't feel like I need that 2 or 3 times a week.
Mhm.
Kind of now what I do is every day I try to take what I call gratitude walks. And
Mm.
so for now, what's helping me is I basically get up and I spend half an hour and I walk around my neighborhood. And those walks are, gratitude is just flowing out of me naturally. Like I'm not forcing it. I'm just taking a walk and I'm looking at it's a beautiful day, and I'm just like, God, thank you for my life. Thank you for my family. Thank you for, all these wonderful things in my life. And by the time I come back home, I'm in that same place again of like connection and oneness, and like, yeah, this is good, and I recognize this connection. And so, but those are just things that work for me.
Mhm.
Right. My wife loves gardening. And so for her to spend time in the backyard, digging in the dirt and planting and things, she'll come back in sometimes and just have these real life object lessons of like, oh my gosh, I was doing this thing and God showed me this. And I'm like, wow, that's awesome. So I think everyone kind of needs to discover their own sort of spiritual practices
Mm.
that help them do that, right? I teach a course, it's an online course called Square One, and it's partly helping people sort of leave that kind of toxic theology, a Christian mindset and discover. So we have a whole day, a whole week where we spend on discovering new spiritual practices. And I give people like a list of things to try, new things you've never tried before. And the goal in that exercise is, you're going to find some things that don't work. You're going to be like, yeah, that didn't work. Good. Scratch it off. Don't ever do that again. Or just don't do it until, you feel like it works again for you. But you will find some things like, wow, this was really helpful. This was really good, right? Because we're all different and we're all in different spaces. We're all in different, points on the map. But I encourage people to try those things and experience to see what really works for them. And then again, so just practice those things. And again, like sometimes it's taking walks in nature, it's painting, it's making music. It's for other people, it's serving other people. It's going down to the homeless shelter and serving and or volunteering at a senior home or something like that. Everybody has to find what is working for them, what helps them connect and kind of sort of stay in that space. So I don't know, I don't have any, I can't tell anybody listening, do this, because it would not work for everybody. But I think everyone has to discover their own process.
Well, Keith, even your answer is in alignment with the gospel. That's what Jesus would do. He would tell
Yes.
us what to do. He'd be like, figure it out. But maybe here's
Yes.
some options that you can try on,
Yeah.
right? So I feel that that's inspiring. And I'm kind of called to even ask the people who are listening that if there's particular practices that work for you, where you feel closest to Christ,
Yeah.
closest to the love, share with us below so that we can all be inspired by each other's tools and like what they do and how it works for them.
Yeah.
So I resonate and say yes to everything that you do and have done, because me too, but it's different phases in our lives where something particularly might take precedence or be the main thing that's most helpful. So right
Cool.
now my thing is like pausing. I say PCC, I pause and I connect and then I continue. So it's my
Nice.
idea that before I do anything or say anything to anyone or go anywhere, I'm pausing, I'm
Mhm.
connecting with the Christ, and then I continue on my day. So it's like my
That's
little
cool.
nod to we're doing this together, right? We have fun, right?
Yes, exactly. I love that.
I think I'm at the end of my questions. I think like the last thing that I have for you is, and you've already given so much goodness, but maybe there's something else. Is there any final thoughts of words of wisdom that you can share with
Mm.
our people? Any final things that are coming through that we should know or that could be helpful to people on their journey?
Yeah. Well, I have really enjoyed this conversation and I really appreciate you giving space for this and allowing me to just share the things that I've learned from Thomas and the importance of this message. I guess, I don't know if it's words of wisdom, but
Mm.
again, just want to emphasize how important it is, I think, that we really understand this message, right? That this is something that Jesus um, was very, very concerned about making sure that his disciples, people that were following him, understood. And it was a very important truth, right? And this truth was, and he communicated in different ways, but the idea that we need to recognize that we are not separated from God, that nothing can ever separate you from God, right? It would be impossible. You would cease to exist. Okay,
Right.
there's no way. Your very existence is because you're connected to God. So the fact that you exist and you're alive and you have consciousness proves that you are connected to the great consciousness, right?
Amen.
To the one source. And so, but the implications of that are so powerful and so important in this day and age. Again, as I said earlier, we are so divided. And I would say to anyone, anytime you bump up against that division, anytime you experience that feeling of that separation and that division, um, I would say what you're saying, find a way to sort of take that pause and remind yourself, this isn't real.
Right.
This is a lie. I'm not divided from these people. And sometimes it may be really hard to find it. Right. Just say talk about practical,
Yeah.
that I have family members, I have friends that like, man, they really emphasize their separateness from me, almost like they're trying to emphasize it. But it's there, and so it may take a little bit of an effort, but you can find the connection. And you can maybe help them find it as well. Because sometimes that's what's happening is they don't see it either. So you have to help them recognize, oh, there is a connection here. We do have something in common. We have a shared humanity and we have a shared divinity. And so again, press into that and believe that and trust that. I think it's what we need now more than ever. And I'm so grateful that we have the Gospel of Thomas. I'm so grateful for the words of Jesus, for this reminder. And like I said, I think we're living in a day and age where we need it more than ever. So I encourage people to lean into that.
Yes. Oh, amen, Keith. Like, and thank you for bringing the gospel to us and to our awareness, and for your just like pristine and thoughtful and humble like views and conclusions on what Jesus said, because it's truly a gem, and I'm so grateful that it's here for us, and you really help make it more, yeah, understandable in the way that it needs to be for us to trust it and experience it ourselves. So thank you so much for writing the book and bringing this to us, and thank you for your time and being here today. I've enjoyed every minute being with you. So this has been wonderful.
Same here. Thank you, Brittany.
Awesome. You're so welcome. And a final thought, I will put links to your book below so that people who are inspired to read it and get a copy totally can. And my friends, as always, like and subscribe so this message gets brought to whom it's meant for. Thank you for being here. Bye, everyone.